Greetings, it is I, Countess Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue our discussion on EARTHDAWN, the role-playing game system. Now, when we last left off, we were diving into spell magic. Let's start talking about the other types of spell magic, other than matrix casting, which is just a general spell casting. Let's dive into raw magic. Now, raw magic is something of a last resort, because it is the least used of all the three types of spell casting, and it tends to be one of the more dangerous ones for you to cast. Effectively, when I am casting a spell, I weave my threads into myself. I'm using my own pattern in order to channel all these magical energies. So I'm channeling all that magic energy through my own body, and any results of that energy going through there are going to result through me, rather than through a matrices that I might have. Those function for a reason. They basically filter things out. I don't have a filter in myself. And because I don't have this filter, it also does mean I am not restricted on the circles of spells I know. I could use any circle of spell that I am aware of at this point in time. But doing this often resorts in things such as damage and other negative effects. It's damaging to channel all this energy through you very often. So I'm going to weave my spell threads as normal, cast the spell as normal, and it's normally going to have the exact same results, the exact same duration. The spell will function normally. It's the aftermath of the spell which is going to change. I can be affected by warping, damage, and possibly attracting the attention of horror marks. So in a way, it functions exactly the same way as the Matrix does, up until these after effects hit you, which the extent of the after effects are going to be it's going to really depend on the condition of the astral space around you, how much horrors have actually affected and tainted it. If it's actually untainted astral space, you don't have to worry about it at all. But let's talk about that, though. The extent of damage and warping is going to be reliant on the status, the effects of horrors upon astral space around you. But it will also be dependent on the circle of spell that you're attempting to cast. These two factors combined tell you how much warping and damage are going to affect you. There's a chart in the book which you can just take a quick look at to get an idea about this. So effectively, I've cast a raw magic spell. My game master now makes a warping test versus my spell defense. Now this is your internal spell defense. This means anything you might have on top of you, any kind of magic items or other types of things that might boost you, have no effect. This is everything that's within you. External sources that might boost your spell defense will not whatsoever. Anything that naturally will have an effect here. So you can see already your spell defense might be lower than you want it to be against this. So if the warping is successful, then I get hit with the damage, which again my game master will look to the table to see of the actual effects and how much damage it is, once again based on the condition of astral space and the circle I am using, and they would roll against my mystic defense, but this is my internal mystic defense again. It's my base mystic defense, because it's inside me that this damage is coming from, this warping is coming from. So you can see there is this limitation on it in the fact that you only have so much defense against the raw magic that you're pulling through you. I might use that higher circle spell, but it also might tear me apart from the inside. Now this isn't the only thing that occurs. Think of it this way. I cast a raw magic spell. This is equivalent to shooting a flare off in the middle of the night. Think of it that way. That you might begin to attract things to you that you might want to maintain yourself and be hidden from. Horrors, for example. Now, in the early days, before the Scourge, when people didn't have spell matrices, they didn't know they were basically shooting off a flare every time they cast magic. And when things like horrors started to become more and more common, bad things were happening to people. Spell matrices were developed as a result of this by the people that basically survived and learned about horrors. After warping and damage are done, then the game master, your game master, basically makes a check to see if a horror notices you or some other type of being. This horror mark test will once again be against your base spell defense. So if it is successful, a horror has noticed you and very well may mark you. They have the option of doing so. The mark basically becomes a channeling point to you, a doorway to you. Using it, they can of course communicate with you, usually over hundreds of miles, and they can do things like cast spells on you and other effects. Now there is distance limitations to a mark, but it's hard to say exactly what they are, and it will also depend on the horror that's trying to affect you too. There's factors to it, and usually it's going to be GM determined. Now this mark will last for a year and a day, but when it would be up, the horror may automatically renew it if they are within range. The easiest way of saying this is that a player can do nothing to stop a horror from renewing its mark on you. As long as it's alive, it can just do that. You can't do anything to stop that. There have been known to be horrors which will go for years, silently renewing that mark on a target before finally doing something about it. That basically they just keep that connection for that perfect time that they can do something to the person that's affected by it. Now let's move on though and talk about Grimoire magic, because this is one that is also quite rare. It's especially rare in the region that most EARTHDAWN games take place in, but it is an option of last resort you can have, and it tends to be something that's better than raw magic for you, because effectively you're channeling that energy through the Grimoire. You can cast any spell within this Grimoire, regardless if you know it or not, and circle doesn't matter in this case too. So even if it is your Grimoire personally that you may have, then it doesn't matter for circle. If it's one that you've just found, you don't need to know the spells from it. So you can see there's these advantages to it in the first place. And it's more difficult than, of course, matrix casting to hear. But unfortunately, Grimoire casting has some of the dangers inherent to, of course, raw magic. It's a great option when you have no other options. Use Grimoire magic. Now, the thing about a Grimoire is that every spell that is etched in it, it has that pattern within it. It is in fact a grimoire that the initial spell matrices were actually modeled after, the concept of it being able to store multiple patterns. The grimoire has those patterns of all those spells. The thing about it, the difference between a matrix and a grimoire, is a matrix is developed to filter out corrupt magical energies that might be within the astral plane. Grimoire is not made to do that. So when you begin to channel those magical energies through the Grimoire using its patterns, then you're going to have to worry about that corrupt energy entering into there. So the Grimoire itself could be damaged, the patterns within it could be corrupted, and at worst, it could become an item that begins to attract horrors to it. So you can see there's definitely a disadvantage to it, because you might, for one thing, ruin your grimoire that you have here. Again, whether it's a found one or the one you made yourself, or you could possibly begin to have it basically be a dinner bell for very bad things that you don't want to deal with. Now, it's also important to note, it has a slightly, when you're using grimoire casting, you're using a slightly different casting sequence than normal. But that's it for today. I talked all about raw magic today. I went over all the details of it and the major effects that it would have on you for casting it. Basically, you have to face warping, and then face the damage of warping, and possibly face attracting horrors to you and having them mark you, which they may use right away, or they could wait years to do something really bad to you when they have the right chance to. So you can see that raw magic it's there, you could cast it. It's just as easy in a way as spell matrices casting. But there's these negative side effects that make it really bad. Terrible to do. I started talking about grimoire magic then, which is similar to raw magic, except rather than channeling it through yourself, you're channeling it through a book, a grimoire, a magical tome filled with spells, which might ruin the book. But then again, it might be a last resort of casting. It's probably better to ruin the book than to ruin you, especially when it comes to things like horrors and damage. Now, I did mention that sequence. It's got a different one. In the next episode, we're going to dive into that different spellcasting sequence and how it works differently for Grimoire magic rather than spell magic or role casting. Because both of those work pretty much exactly the same, except that the raw magic, you don't have to worry about attuning. That's the thing, is you don't have to attune to a matrix for role casting, so that step's completely gone. I will also move into talking about dispelling magic, and we'll try to move into finishing up spell magic soon. But if you have any questions, comments, anything you say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It's just for the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you could always check out my Patreon, link in the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.